For 18 years, I went to sleep every night with hatred in my heart, thinking my father had abandoned us for nothing. But that night during my shift, when I realized that the dying man marked as John Doe was actually my father, my blood ran cold. He didn't recognize me. He looked into my eyes but didn't see me. Until, just before his last breath, he whispered a terrible secret in my ear. It turned out my father hadn't run away. He had been held in a dungeon for 18 years by the person I trusted most in my life. My knees buckled at what I heard, but I didn't have time to cry because he was walking in. The killer was at the hospital door to hug me. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but the justice I was about to serve would be colder than ice. You won't believe the miracle that saved my father and how I checkmated the man who destroyed my family at his own game. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and buckle up, because this story will make you question every family bond you know. My name is Gianna. I'm the head nurse at a major trauma center in Albany, New York. I thought I had seen it all: gunshot wounds, terrible accidents, last breaths. But I couldn't have known that the radio call on that Tuesday night would change my life from the roots up. And it was around 3 a.m. Rain was pounding against the hospital windows, and the familiar chaotic hum of the ER continued. The doors flew open and paramedics rushed in a soaking wet gurney. Late 30s, no ID, found unconscious by the roadside, severe hypothermia, and multiple trauma, shouted one of the paramedics. I ran to the man. His face was covered in mud and blood, his hair matted together. But the moment I cut away his old tattered sweater with my shears, the world stopped. Time froze. The beeping of the monitors faded away. On the man's left shoulder, right under his collarbone, was a faded but still distinct tattoo, a small lighthouse, and underneath it, written in crooked handwriting, "My light, Gianna." My breath hitched. My hands started to shake. I remembered this tattoo. It was the one he got when I was 8 years old, sitting on his lap asking, "Daddy, if you get lost at sea, how will you find me?" This man was Daniel Carter. My father, who left the house 18 years ago saying, "I'm going to the store," and never came back. The father the police closed the file on, saying, "He ran away voluntarily. He abandoned you. Nurse, pulse is dropping. We're losing him." I was startled by the doctor shouting. I had to put my shock aside and wear my professional mask. He wasn't my father right now. He was my patient, and I couldn't let him die. The intervention took hours. His condition was critical. Years of malnutrition, old and new fractures on his body. He looked like a prisoner of war. When we stabilized him and moved him to the ICU, we were left alone in the room. I wiped the mud from his face. He had aged. He was so thin, but he was my dad. He opened his eyes slightly. In that moment, I thought my heart would beat out of my chest. "Dad," I whispered, my voice trembling. "It's me, Gianna." His eyes were unfocused. He didn't recognize me. It was like he was staring into a void. But then, as if he were afraid of an invisible ghost, he squeezed my hand with all his might. The grip was strong enough to break my bones. His lips moved, his voice nothing but a raspy whisper. "Gianna, don't forgive me, but don't go near him." "Who, Dad? Who shouldn't I go near?" I asked, tears streaming down my cheeks. His eyes locked on a spot on the ceiling, widened in fear, and he mumbled that name. "Walter. Walter is coming." In that moment, the air in the room turned to ice. Walter. Walter Beaumont. My grandfather. My mother's father. The sweet old grandpa who took us under his wing in my father's absence, paid for my nursing school, the city's most respected philanthropist businessman who sat in the front row of church every Sunday. "Dad, Grandpa Walter, he protected us. You're talking nonsense," I said. But my father shook his head, tears streaming from his eyes. "No, he took me, Gianna. He buried me." And suddenly, the monitors began to beep with a high-pitched sound. My father was having a seizure. Just then, the door to the room slowly opened. In the dim light of the corridor, with his cane in hand and wearing his usual expensive cashmere coat, my grandfather, Walter, appeared. He had that fake, compassionate smile on his face. "Gianna, honey." Page 2. His voice was warm and concerned, like honey dripping from a spoon, but after what my father had just whispered, that voice sounded like poison to my ears. "I heard there was an emergency at the hospital, so I came to check on you, darling," Walter said, stepping into the room with his cane, tapping against the sterile floor. "You know how I worry about you working these late shifts?" I stood frozen between my seizing father and my grandfather, feeling like I was standing on the edge of two different realities. The medical team rushed in, pushing me aside as they worked to stabilize my father again. Walter's eyes drifted to the bed, to the man lying there, and for just a split second, I saw something flicker across his face. Not surprise, not curiosity, but recognition followed immediately by something darker, something cold and calculating. "Who is this poor soul?" he asked, but his voice had changed just slightly, like a guitar string tuned a half note off. "John Doe," I lied instinctively, my nursing training kicking in about patient confidentiality, but also because every cell in my body was suddenly screaming at me to protect my father. "Found by the roadside, no identification." Walter nodded slowly, his pale blue eyes never leaving my father's face. How terrible. The world is full of lost souls, isn't it? He placed his weathered hand on my shoulder, and I had to fight every urge not to flinch away. "You look exhausted, my dear. Why don't you come home with me? Your mother would love to see you, and you need rest." "I'm fine, Grandpa. I need to finish my shift," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Something in his grip tightened, just for a moment before he released me. "Of course. Always so dedicated. You got that from your mother's side of the family." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Call me if you need anything, Gianna. Anything at all." After he left, I stood there trembling, watching through the window as his black Mercedes pulled away from the hospital entrance. My father's words echoed in my mind like a death sentence. He took me. He buried me. I looked back at my father, now sedated and stable, hooked up to various machines. The tattoo on his shoulder seemed to glow under the harsh hospital lights. My light, Gianna. If what he said was true, if Walter had really taken him, then my entire life for the past 18 years had been built on a lie. Every birthday gift from Grandpa Walter, every scholarship check, every Sunday dinner, every hug, every "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart," had been from the man who had stolen my father from me. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and did something I should have done years ago. I searched for my father's missing person case. The police report from 2007 popped up on the screen. Daniel Carter, age 32, last seen leaving his residence on the evening of March 15th, reportedly told his wife he was going to the convenience store. Vehicle found abandoned 3 days later at a rest stop 50 miles outside Albany. Credit cards never used, phone never turned on again. Case closed after 6 months, classified as voluntary disappearance. But there was something else in the file, something I had been too young and too heartbroken to notice back then. The detective who closed the case was Lieutenant Richard Brennan, who had retired just 2 years later and, according to a quick social media search, now lived in a very expensive house in the Hamptons and sat on the board of several companies. Companies that, as I dug deeper, were all connected to Beaumont Enterprises, my grandfather's business empire. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. I had to know the truth, but I couldn't do this alone, and I couldn't trust the police, not if Walter had them in his pocket. I needed help, and I needed it from someone who existed outside my grandfather's world. That's when I remembered Marcus. Marcus Shaw was an investigative journalist who had tried to do a story on Beaumont Enterprises 3 years ago, something about shady real estate deals and displaced families. The story never ran. His editor killed it. And Marcus had been pushing papers at a small local news outlet ever since. But I remembered how angry he had been, how he had told me over coffee one day that powerful men like Walter Beaumont thought they were untouchable. I found his number and texted him from the hospital bathroom, my fingers flying over the screen. "It's Gianna Carter. You were right about Walter Beaumont. I need your help. My father is alive." The response came within 2 minutes. Where and when? Over the next few days, I lived a double life. During the day, I was the dutiful granddaughter, visiting my mother, accepting Walter's concerned phone calls about my well-being, playing the part I had played for 18 years. But at night, Marcus and I worked like demons possessed, digging into my grandfather's past. My father remained in the ICU, drifting in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid, sometimes lost in what seemed like traumatic memories. When he was aware, I would sit by his bedside and he would tell me fragments of the truth, pieces of a nightmare that I had to assemble like a horrific puzzle. "He never wanted your mother to marry me," my father whispered one night, his voice raspy from disuse. "I wasn't good enough, not wealthy enough, not from the right family. But your mother loved me and we eloped. When you were born, I thought he had finally accepted me. He seemed so happy, so proud to be a grandfather." His eyes filled with tears. That night, I did go to the store, but on my way back, I was run off the road. When I woke up, I was in a concrete room with no windows. Walter was there, standing over me with 2 other men. He told me that I had 2 choices. I could disappear and my family would be taken care of, or I could refuse and watch everyone I loved die, starting with you. I gripped his hand tighter, my own tears falling onto the white hospital sheets. "He kept me in that room for 3 months, Gianna. 3 months in the dark with just enough food and water to keep me alive. He would visit sometimes, show me pictures of you and your mother, tell me how well you were doing without me, how your mother had stopped crying, how you had stopped asking for me. He broke me down until I believed that you were better off thinking I had abandoned you than knowing I was dead." My father's voice cracked as he continued, and I had to lean closer to hear him. "After those first 3 months, he moved me. I don't know where, somewhere far from Albany, somewhere isolated. He had people watching me, always watching. I was given a new identity, put to work in one of his factories under a fake name, living in a small apartment that was more like a cell. Every cent I earned went back to him, and if I ever tried to run, if I ever tried to contact you, he made it clear that you would pay the price." I couldn't breathe, couldn't process the magnitude of what he was telling me. "For 18 years, Dad. 18 years. He nodded weakly. "I tried to escape 4 times. The first 3 times, they caught me and brought me back. The punishment was always the same: weeks in solitary confinement, beatings, starvation. But the 4th time, about 2 weeks ago, something changed. The man who was supposed to be watching me had a heart attack. In the chaos, I managed to steal a car and drive. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get back to Albany, back to you. I had to warn you before he realized I was gone." His grip on my hand tightened with surprising strength. "Gianna, you have to understand, Walter Beaumont is not the man you think he is. The philanthropy, the charity work, the respectable businessman facade, it's all a mask. Behind it, he's involved in things that would make your blood run cold. Human trafficking, money laundering, blackmail, even murder. He has politicians, police, judges, everyone in his pocket. That's why I couldn't just go to the authorities. There is no one to trust." "Then how did you end up on that roadside?" I asked, wiping my tears away. "His men found me. I was almost to Albany when they ran me off the road, just like they did 18 years ago. But this time, something went wrong for them. A state trooper happened to be nearby and saw the crash. They had to flee before they could finish the job. I guess they thought I would die from my injuries before anyone could identify me." My father's eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my heart stop. "But I didn't die, Gianna. And now Walter knows I'm here in this hospital. He knows I'm alive and he knows I can talk. You're in danger now, terrible danger, and I'm so sorry for bringing this to your door." As if on cue, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my grandfather. "Dinner tomorrow night, 7 p.m., my house. Your mother insists. Don't make an old man beg, sweetheart." I showed the text to my father, and I watched the color drain from his already pale face. "Don't go," he pleaded. "Please, Gianna, don't go." But I knew I had to. I had to look Walter Beaumont in the eyes now that I knew the truth, had to see if I could spot the monster behind the mask. More than that, I needed to buy time. Marcus had found something big, but he needed a few more days to verify it. "I'll be fine, Dad," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "I know what he is now, and I won't be alone. Marcus is working on exposing him, and I'm going to wear a wire to dinner. We're going to get every word, every confession we can." My father shook his head desperately. "You don't understand how dangerous he is, how far his reach extends. The people who work for him, they're not just employees, they're fanatics. He saves them from their worst moments, gives them purpose, and in return, they would kill for him without hesitation." I kissed my father's forehead. "Then I'll be very, very careful. But Dad, we can't run from him forever. He's taken 18 years from us. I'm not going to let him take one more day." The next evening, I stood in front of my grandfather's mansion, the same house where I had spent countless holidays and Sunday dinners, where I had learned to ride a bike on the circular driveway, where I had celebrated my graduation from nursing school. Now it looked different to me, like a beautiful mausoleum hiding terrible secrets. Marcus was parked down the street in an unmarked van, monitoring the wire I wore taped to my chest. In my purse, I had a small can of pepper spray and my phone set to speed dial 911, though I knew from my father's warnings that the police might not help me. My mother answered the door, her face lighting up when she saw me. She looked older than her 56 years, worn down by nearly 2 decades of being a single mother and believing herself a widow in all but name. "Gianna, sweetheart," she hugged me tight. "I've missed you so much. You worked too hard at that hospital." Guilt washed over me. Should I tell her? Should I tell her that her father had stolen her husband, that the man she had mourned for 18 years was lying in a hospital bed just a few miles away? But not yet, I decided. Not until I had proof. Not until Walter couldn't hurt her anymore. Walter was in his study, a grand room filled with leather-bound books and expensive artwork. He stood by the fireplace, swirling a glass of bourbon, looking every inch the distinguished patriarch. "Gianna, my dear," he said warmly, setting down his glass to embrace me. His hug felt like being wrapped in a snake's coils. "You look tired. Are you getting enough sleep? I worry about you, especially after that difficult case the other night, that poor John Doe." His mention of my father made my blood run cold, but I forced a smile. "I'm fine, Grandpa. Just a busy week." We made small talk over dinner, my mother chatting about her book club and her volunteer work at the church, completely oblivious to the tension crackling between Walter and me. Every time he looked at me, I felt like he was studying me, searching for any sign that I knew his secret. After dinner, my mother went to the kitchen to prepare dessert, and Walter asked me to join him in his study for a brandy. This was it, I thought. This was when the mask would slip. He poured 2 glasses and handed one to me, then settled into his leather chair with a satisfied sigh. "I want to talk to you about something important, Gianna," he began, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "You're 38 years old now, no husband, no children, dedicating your entire life to taking care of strangers in that hospital. Don't you think it's time you started thinking about your own future, your own family?" I gripped my glass tighter. "I'm happy with my life, Grandpa." "Are you?" he challenged, leaning forward. "Or are you still punishing yourself for your father's abandonment? Gianna, it's been 18 years. Daniel made his choice. He left because he was weak, because he couldn't handle the responsibility of a family. You need to let go of that anger and move on." Hearing him speak my father's name, hearing him lie so smoothly about a man he had tortured and imprisoned, made something inside me snap. I set down my brandy glass carefully, my hand trembling with barely controlled rage. "You're right, Grandpa," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "It has been 18 years. 18 years of wondering why my father left, of hating him for abandoning us, of watching my mother cry herself to sleep. 18 years of you being there for us, supporting us, loving us." I paused, watching his face carefully. "You must have really hated him to do all that for us." Something flickered in Walter's eyes, a brief shadow of surprise before his composed mask returned. "Hated him? No, dear. I pitied him. I pitied the fact that he threw away a beautiful family for whatever selfish reasons drove him away." "That's strange," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "Because you see, the most interesting patient came into my ER a few nights ago. A man who had been missing for 18 years, a man who had the name Gianna tattooed on his shoulder, a man who told me a very different story about why he disappeared." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Walter's genial expression didn't change, but his eyes went cold, utterly cold, like looking into the eyes of a shark. "Gianna," he said softly, dangerously, "what exactly are you suggesting?" I stood up, my legs shaking but my resolve firm. "I'm not suggesting anything, Grandpa. I'm telling you that I know what you did. I know you took my father. I know you've kept him prisoner for 18 years. I know about the factories, the fake identities, the men who watch and beat anyone who tries to escape. I know everything." For a long moment, Walter said nothing. Then slowly he began to laugh. It was a terrible sound, devoid of any real humor, more like the creaking of a door in an abandoned house. "Oh, Gianna," he said, shaking his head, "you're so much like your mother when she was young. Passionate, idealistic, naive. Do you really think that if any of what you just said were true, that I would let you walk out of this house?" My blood turned to ice. "My mother is in the next room." "Your mother," Walter said, standing up and moving toward me with surprising speed for a man his age, "has been sedated. The tea she drank with dinner contained a mild sleeping agent. She's currently unconscious in the guest bedroom, and she'll wake up in a few hours with no memory of anything unusual happening tonight. Just a pleasant dinner with her family." I backed toward the door, but Walter moved between me and the exit. "You're wearing a wire, aren't you?" "Of course you are. You're clever. I've always known that. But cleverness without wisdom is just another form of stupidity, my dear." He reached out and grabbed my arm with a grip like iron. "Did you really think I wouldn't have countermeasures in place? This entire house is equipped with signal jammers. Whatever recording device you're wearing has been transmitting nothing but static since you walked through that door. Your friend Marcus is listening to white noise right now, probably panicking but unable to reach you." Terror flooded through me. I tried to pull away, but Walter's grip only tightened. "Let me tell you a story, Gianna, about your father. Daniel was a good man. I'll give him that, but he was also an idealist and a fool. He found out about certain aspects of my business operations, things that I prefer to keep private. He threatened to go to the authorities, threatened to take my daughter away from me, threatened to poison my granddaughter's mind against me. So yes, I removed him from the equation. I gave him the choice to disappear quietly, to let you and your mother live in peace and prosperity, but he refused. So I made the decision for him." His face was inches from mine now, and I could smell the brandy on his breath. "For 18 years, I have provided for you and your mother. I paid for your education, your mother's house, everything you have. In return, all I asked was loyalty and silence. Daniel couldn't give me that, so he lost his freedom. Now you're making the same mistake he did." "You're insane," I whispered. "No, my dear, I'm practical. I'm a man who understands that sometimes terrible things must be done to protect what matters most. I love you, Gianna, I truly do. You're my blood, my granddaughter. But I loved your mother too, and I still made your father disappear. Don't force me to make a similar choice with you." Suddenly the study door burst open. But it wasn't my mother or Marcus. It was a man I had never seen before, tall and scarred, with cold eyes that had seen too much violence. "Sir," he said to Walter, "we have a problem. The John Doe patient is gone from the hospital." Walter's grip on my arm tightened painfully. "What do you mean, gone?" "He discharged himself against medical advice 2 hours ago. Security footage shows him leaving through a service exit. We've lost him." A terrible smile spread across Walter's face as he looked at me. "Well, well. Your father is more resourceful than I gave him credit for. He's somewhere out there, weak and wounded, probably trying to find help, trying to save you. How touching." He released my arm and stepped back. "Here's what's going to happen, Gianna. You're going to call your father right now and tell him to come here, to turn himself in. If he does, I promise you both a quick and painless end. If he doesn't, if he runs, then I will make sure that your mother suffers for his cowardice. I will destroy her slowly, financially, and emotionally until she begs me for death. The choice is his, but you'll be the one to deliver the message." I stared at him in horror, truly seeing the monster behind the mask for the first time. This was the man who had held my hand at my father's memorial service, who had wiped away my tears and told me everything would be okay. This was the man who had taught me to play chess, who had told me I could be anything I wanted to be, who had been at my nursing school graduation with flowers and pride in his eyes. And none of it had been real. It had all been a lie, a performance, a manipulation. "I won't do it," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Then your mother will pay the price," Walter said simply. "Take her downstairs," he ordered the scarred man. "Put her in the room next to where we kept Daniel. Let's see how much she enjoys the family accommodations." As the man grabbed me, I did the only thing I could think of. I screamed as loud as I could, hoping against hope that someone, anyone, would hear me. But we were in Walter's mansion, surrounded by acres of private property, with the nearest neighbor half a mile away. No one was coming to save me. The man dragged me toward a door I had never noticed before, hidden behind a bookshelf that swung open to reveal a narrow staircase descending into darkness. I fought with everything I had, kicking and scratching and biting, but he was too strong and too experienced. Within moments, my hands were zip-tied behind my back, and I was being half-carried, half-dragged down steps that seemed to go on forever, deeper and deeper into the earth beneath my grandfather's beautiful mansion. The basement was nothing like the rest of the house, where upstairs was all polished wood and expensive art. Down here was concrete and cold steel, and the smell of dampness and despair. The scarred man threw me into a small cell with a metal door and a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. Through the walls, I could hear water dripping somewhere, and in the distance, what sounded like someone crying. "Welcome home, Miss Carter," the man said with a cruel smile before slamming the door shut. I was alone in the darkness, and for the first time in my life, I truly understood the depth of my grandfather's evil. This wasn't just a crime of passion or a single terrible decision. This was systematic, organized, a prison built beneath a family home, a torture chamber hidden under Sunday dinners and Christmas presents. How many people had suffered down here? How many had died? Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time lost all meaning in that concrete box. I tried the door, tried to find any weakness in the walls, tried to stay calm and think like a nurse, assessing my situation clinically. I wasn't injured. I wasn't in immediate danger. I just needed to survive until I could find a way out. Then I heard footsteps in the corridor outside, and the door opened. But it wasn't Walter or his scarred henchman. It was my father, looking like death itself, pale and shaking and barely able to stand, but his eyes were fierce with determination. "Dad," I gasped. "How did you—" "Shh," he whispered, putting a finger to his lips. He held up a set of keys he must have stolen from somewhere and began working on my zip ties with a small knife. I know this place, Gianna. I spent 3 months memorizing every sound, every footstep, every shift change. When I heard you scream at dinner through the heating vents that connect to the study, I knew Walter had you. I couldn't let it happen again. I couldn't lose you again. My hands came free, and I threw my arms around him, feeling how thin he was, how fragile. Nothing like the strong father I remembered from childhood. "We have to go now," he urged. "Walter's men are searching the grounds for me, but they think I'm trying to escape, not that I came back. We have maybe 10 minutes before they realize their mistake." "What about Mom?" I asked desperately. "We can't leave her with him." "She's safe for now," my father said. "Walter won't hurt her until he has us both. She's his leverage, his insurance policy. But once we're free, once we can get to the real authorities, not the ones he owns, then we can save her too." We crept through the basement corridors, my father navigating by memory through a maze of cells and storage rooms. In one room, I saw surveillance equipment, dozens of monitors showing different parts of the property. In another, filing cabinets that I knew must contain evidence of Walter's crimes. "We need to take those files," I said, but my father shook his head. "No time. We take ourselves, we take our lives, and we live to fight another day. That's the only mission right now." We reached a service tunnel that my father said led to an exit near the old groundskeeper's cottage on the edge of the property. We were almost there, almost free, when we heard voices ahead of us. Walter's men were sweeping the tunnels. We were trapped between them and the basement behind us. My father pulled me into a side room, some kind of mechanical space filled with the house's heating and electrical systems. We crouched behind a water heater, barely breathing, as footsteps passed within feet of us. But then, disaster struck. My phone, which I had somehow managed to keep in my pocket, began to ring. The sound was deafening in the confined space. Marcus was calling, probably desperate to know if I was alive. The footsteps stopped, turned back. "In here!" someone shouted. The door burst open and 3 of Walter's men rushed in with flashlights and guns. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. We were caught. They dragged us back through the tunnels, back to the basement prison, but this time they took us to a larger room, one that made my blood run cold. It was set up like an interrogation chamber, with chairs bolted to the floor and drains in the concrete for washing away blood. Walter was waiting for us there, sitting calmly in a leather chair like a king on his throne. "Daniel," he said with mock disappointment, "you've caused me so much trouble over the years. I really thought 18 years would have broken that stubborn spirit of yours. And Gianna, my dear, I gave you a chance to cooperate. Why do you both insist on making this harder than it needs to be?" My father pushed me behind him, trying to shield me even now. "Let her go, Walter. This is between you and me. It always has been." "No, Daniel, it stopped being just between us the moment she found you in that hospital. She knows too much now, and unlike you, she has friends, connections, people who will ask questions if she disappears. I'm going to have to be more creative with her disposal." Walter stood and walked over to us, studying us like a scientist examining insects. "I've been thinking about this problem all evening, trying to find a solution that satisfies all parties, and I believe I've found one." He snapped his fingers and his men brought in another person, Marcus, the journalist, beaten and bloodied but alive. "Mr. Shaw here has been quite the thorn in my side for years," Walter continued, "always digging, always asking questions, always trying to bring me down. When his van was found parked outside my property tonight with surveillance equipment inside, well, it gave me an idea." Walter's smile was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. Here's the story that will be told. Marcus Shaw, a disgraced journalist with a grudge against me, kidnapped my granddaughter as part of some delusional revenge scheme. Her father, the man who abandoned her 18 years ago, returned and tried to save her. But tragically, Shaw killed them both before taking his own life. I, the grieving grandfather, will be devastated, but will somehow find the strength to establish a foundation in their memory to help other families torn apart by violence. It's perfect, really. Tragic, but perfect. "You're a monster," Marcus spat through his split lip, blood running down his chin. "You're a demon wearing a human face." Walter's expression didn't change, but he nodded to one of his men who struck Marcus across the face with the butt of a gun, sending him crashing to the floor. "The problem with idealists like you, Mr. Shaw, is that you think truth matters, that exposure means something. But I've been building my empire for 40 years, and I've learned that truth is just another commodity to be bought, sold, and buried. No one is coming to save you. No one even knows you're here, except me and my people, and we're all very good at keeping secrets." I felt my father's hand squeeze mine, and in that moment I understood what he had endured for 18 years. This helplessness, this absolute power that Walter held over life and death, this sickening realization that a monster could wear the face of a loving grandfather and no one would ever believe the truth. But then something extraordinary happened, something that would later seem like a miracle, but in that moment felt like simple human courage. My mother's voice echoed down the corridor, sharp and commanding, despite the sedatives Walter had given her. "Walter Beaumont, what have you done?" We all turned to see her standing in the doorway, her eyes clear and blazing with fury. She must have fought through the drugs through sheer force of will, must have realized something was terribly wrong and gone searching for answers. Behind her stood 2 state police officers I didn't recognize, and behind them, a woman in an FBI windbreaker. "Mrs. Carter," the FBI agent said, her voice professional but kind, "please step back and let us handle this." Walter's face went through a series of emotions: surprise, anger, calculation, and finally, resignation. But even cornered, he still tried to manipulate the situation. "Officers, thank God you're here," he said, his voice filled with false relief. "This man," he pointed at Marcus, "broke into my home and was threatening my family. I was just trying to protect them until you arrived." But my mother walked past the officers, walked right up to Walter, and slapped him across the face with all the strength of 18 years of grief and betrayal. "I heard everything, Father," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. "The heating vents in your house carry sound better than you think. I heard what you did to Daniel. I heard what you were planning to do to my daughter. I heard it all." She turned to the FBI agent, tears streaming down her face but her voice steady. 3 months ago, I started having doubts about my father. Little things didn't add up. Documents I found in his office that didn't make sense, phone calls he would take in private. So I did something I never thought I would do. I contacted the FBI. Agent Morrison here has been investigating my father's business operations for months, and tonight, when I called her and told her my daughter was in danger, she came with every resource she had. Agent Morrison stepped forward, and I saw 6 more federal agents filing into the room behind her, weapons drawn. "Walter Beaumont, you are under arrest for kidnapping, false imprisonment, conspiracy to commit murder, and about 30 other charges that we've been building against you. You have the right to remain silent, though I suspect you'll have a lot to say once you realize how many of your loyal associates have already turned state's evidence against you." As they handcuffed Walter, he looked at my mother with something like genuine hurt in his eyes. "Elizabeth, how could you betray me? I'm your father. Everything I did for you, to protect you from making mistakes." My mother's face was cold as stone. "The only mistake I made was believing you were a good man. The only mistake I made was not seeing the monster you were until it was almost too late. Daniel tried to tell me years ago, before you took him. He tried to warn me that you were involved in terrible things, but I didn't believe him. I chose you over him, and it's a choice I'll regret for the rest of my life." She turned to my father, who was being examined by paramedics who had flooded into the room. "Daniel, I'm so sorry. I'm so desperately sorry for not believing you, for letting him destroy our family, for all the years you lost." My father, weak and battered but alive, reached out his hand to her. "Elizabeth, you didn't know. He fooled everyone. He's been fooling everyone for decades. You're not to blame." As Walter was led away, still protesting his innocence, still trying to maintain the facade of the respected philanthropist, I felt something break loose inside me. 18 years of hate, of anger, of grief, flowing out like poison from a wound. But underneath that poison was something else, something I thought I had lost forever: hope. Over the next few weeks, as my father recovered in the hospital under FBI protection and Walter's empire crumbled under investigation, the true scope of his crimes came to light. The basement prison beneath his mansion had held 23 different people over the years, some for months, some for years. Most were people who had threatened to expose his business operations, but some were simply people who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, who had seen something they shouldn't have seen. The police found bodies buried on his property, found financial records showing connections to organized crime networks across 3 continents, found evidence of corruption that reached into the highest levels of state government. It was worse than anything we had imagined, worse than anything my father had known when he first tried to expose Walter all those years ago. But here's the thing about the truth. Once it starts coming out, it's like a flood that nothing can stop. People Walter had blackmailed came forward with their stories. People he had threatened found their courage. People he had paid off decided that money wasn't worth their souls anymore. The wall of silence he had built over 40 years came crashing down in a matter of weeks. My father grew stronger every day. The doctors called it remarkable, even miraculous. A man who should have died from his injuries, who should have been broken beyond repair after 18 years of captivity, somehow found the strength not just to survive, but to heal. I think it was because he finally had something to live for: his daughter, his wife, the family he thought he had lost forever. My mother struggled the most with the revelation of who her father truly was. She had loved him, trusted him, believed in him, and discovering that he was a monster wearing a grandfather's face nearly destroyed her. But slowly, day by day, with therapy and support and the love of the family she had thought was broken, she began to heal too. As for me, I learned something profound during those terrible hours in Walter's basement. I learned that evil often wears a familiar face, that monsters can raise you and love you and still be monsters, that you can be betrayed by the people you trust most in the world. But I also learned that courage isn't about being unafraid. It's about being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. The trial of Walter Beaumont became one of the most sensational cases in New York State history. For 3 months, the courthouse in Albany was surrounded by media trucks and protesters, some demanding justice for Walter's victims, others refusing to believe that the beloved philanthropist could be guilty of such heinous crimes. The evidence, however, was overwhelming. The prosecution, led by a team of federal attorneys, presented testimony from 47 witnesses, including former employees who had helped run Walter's underground prison, financial experts who traced his money laundering operations, and most powerfully, survivors of his crimes, who stood up in court and told their stories of captivity and torture. My father was the star witness. Despite his ordeal, despite 18 years of trauma that would have destroyed most people, he sat in that witness box for 4 days and told the complete truth about what Walter Beaumont had done. He described the night he was taken, the concrete cell where he spent his first months, the factory where he was forced to work under an assumed name, the constant surveillance and threats that kept him compliant. The courtroom was silent as he spoke, and I watched the jury's faces change from skepticism to horror, to absolute conviction that the man on trial was guilty. Walter's defense attorneys tried everything. They claimed my father was mentally ill, that his story was a delusion brought on by years of drug abuse and homelessness, that this was all an elaborate scheme to extort money from a wealthy family. They suggested that my mother and I had manipulated my father into telling lies, that we were the real villains trying to steal an innocent man's fortune. But their case fell apart when Agent Morrison presented evidence from Walter's own files, detailed records he had kept of every person he had imprisoned, every crime he had committed, every official he had bribed. Walter's fatal flaw, it turned out, was his arrogance. He had documented everything because he never believed he could be caught, never believed anyone would dare to challenge him. His own meticulous records became the instrument of his downfall. I testified too, describing that last dinner at Walter's mansion, the moment the mask slipped and I saw the monster beneath. I told the jury about how he had drugged my mother, how he had threatened to torture her if my father didn't surrender, how he had calmly planned to murder all three of us and frame Marcus Shaw for our deaths. When I spoke about the years of manipulation, about how this man had held me at my father's fake memorial service while knowing exactly where my father was, while knowing that he was the one who had taken him, several jurors were crying. The verdict came back after just 6 hours of deliberation, guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Walter Beaumont to 15 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. And as the bailiffs led him away, he looked at my mother one last time. I expected him to show remorse, to apologize, to finally admit what he had done. Instead, he smiled and said, "I would do it all again to protect you, Elizabeth. That's what love is, doing whatever it takes." My mother didn't respond, didn't cry, didn't react at all. She just watched him disappear through the door to begin the rest of his life in prison, and then she took my father's hand and we walked out of that courthouse together, a family reunited after 18 years of forced separation. But our story doesn't end with Walter's conviction. In fact, that's where the real miracle began. In the months following the trial, as we worked to rebuild our fractured family, something unexpected happened. People who had been helped by Walter's charitable foundations over the years, people who had received scholarships and grants and support from his various philanthropic endeavors, began to come forward. They were horrified to learn about his crimes, but they also faced a difficult truth. Much of the good in their lives had come from money earned through terrible deeds. What should they do with that knowledge? How could they reconcile the man who had saved their community center with the man who had destroyed so many lives? A national conversation began about the nature of good and evil, about whether one could truly be separated from the other, about what it meant to build something beautiful on a foundation of blood and suffering. My mother, my father, and I spent long nights talking about this question, trying to make sense of it ourselves. Eventually, we came to a decision. We established the Daniel Carter Foundation, funded by the seizure of Walter's assets, dedicated to helping survivors of long-term captivity and families torn apart by crime. We worked with the FBI to identify and support all of Walter's victims, providing them with counseling, legal assistance, and financial help to rebuild their lives. We also started a program to train law enforcement officers to recognize signs of long-term captivity and human trafficking, because my father's case had revealed how easy it is for someone to be imprisoned in plain sight while the world goes on around them, oblivious to their suffering. The foundation became my mother's life work and her path to redemption. She couldn't change the fact that her father was a monster, couldn't take back the years she had unknowingly benefited from his crimes, but she could ensure that his victims were not forgotten, that some good would come from the evil he had done. As for my father, his recovery was nothing short of miraculous. The doctors had initially given him a 30% chance of survival, said that even if he lived, he would likely suffer permanent physical and psychological damage from his ordeal. But within 6 months, he had gained back most of the weight he had lost. The color had returned to his face, And though he still had nightmares and difficult days, he was recognizably the man my mother had fallen in love with all those years ago. On my 39th birthday, exactly 1 year after that terrible night when he was brought into my emergency room, my father did something extraordinary. He took me to the lake where he used to take me fishing when I was a little girl, before Walter destroyed our lives. We sat on the dock in the autumn sunshine, and he pulled out a small box. Inside was a new lighthouse pendant on a silver chain, identical to the tattoo on his shoulder. "When I was in that cell," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "when it was darkest and I thought I would never see you again, I would close my eyes and imagine this lighthouse. I would imagine its light shining across the water, guiding me home. You were that light, Gianna. Even when I couldn't be with you, even when I thought you hated me for abandoning you, the idea of you, the love I had for you, that was the light that kept me alive for 18 years. I took the pendant with shaking hands and let him fasten it around my neck. We sat there in silence for a long time, watching the water and the birds, and the life that had somehow continued despite everything we had been through. I wasted so many years hating you, I finally said, tears streaming down my face. I wasted so much time being angry at you for something you didn't do. You didn't waste anything, my father said firmly. You survived. You became an incredible woman, a healer, someone who saves lives every day. That's not waste. That's triumph. Walter took 18 years from us, but he didn't break you, and he didn't break me. We're still here, still fighting, still loving each other. That's our victory. Marcus Shaw, the journalist who had been beaten and nearly killed in Walter's basement, went on to write a Pulitzer Prize-winning series of articles about the case. His reporting exposed not just Walter's crimes, but the systemic corruption that had allowed a monster to operate in plain sight for decades, protected by his wealth and influence. 3 politicians resigned, 2 police chiefs were fired, and a federal task force was established to investigate similar cases of long-term captivity across the country. Through Marcus's work, my father's story helped save dozens of other people who were being held against their will, hidden in basements and warehouses and remote properties, forgotten by the world but not quite dead. Every time another survivor was found and freed, Marcus would call us with the news, and we would add another name to the list of people we had somehow managed to help through our own nightmare. 1 year turned into 2, then 3, and slowly, impossibly, our family healed. My parents, who had been separated for 18 years, fell in love all over again. It wasn't easy. There were arguments and tears and therapy sessions that left us all emotionally exhausted. My mother struggled with guilt, my father struggled with trauma, and I struggled with anger at a grandfather who had loved me and destroyed me in equal measure. But we did it together, and that made all the difference. My mother and father remarried on a spring day 3 years after his return, in a small ceremony attended only by close friends and family. I stood as my mother's maid of honor, and as I watched them exchange vows for the second time, I realized something profound. Walter had tried to destroy our family, had spent 18 years trying to erase my father from existence, had built an entire empire on lies and violence and cruelty. But love had won. Not some abstract fairy tale version of love, but the real, messy, complicated, difficult love that makes you fight for people even when it's hard, that makes you believe in them even when the world says they're gone, that makes you get up every day and choose hope over despair. My father's survival was called a miracle by the doctors, by the media, by everyone who heard our story. And I suppose, in some ways it was. The odds of him escaping Walter's clutches after 18 years, of surviving his injuries, of being brought to the exact hospital where his daughter worked, of being recognized despite 18 years of absence, those odds were astronomical. But the real miracle wasn't his physical survival. The real miracle was that after everything Walter had done, after 18 years of captivity and torture and isolation, my father still had the capacity to love. He still had the strength to fight for his family, still had the courage to believe that justice was possible, still had the faith that truth would eventually prevail over evil. That's the miracle I hold on to now, 5 years after that terrible night when a John Doe patient came into my ER and changed my life forever. I still work as a nurse, still see trauma and death and suffering every day, but now I see it differently. I see the resilience of the human spirit, the incredible capacity people have to survive the unsurvivable, to heal the unhealable, to forgive the unforgivable. Walter Beaumont died in prison 2 years after his conviction, his empire demolished, his name a synonym for hypocrisy and evil, his legacy one of pain and suffering. When the prison called to inform us of his death, my mother didn't cry. She simply nodded, thanked them for the notification, and hung up the phone. We never visited him in prison, never spoke to him again after the trial. Some people criticized us for this, said we should have shown mercy, should have forgiven him, should have given him a chance to make peace before he died. But I think they misunderstood what forgiveness means. Forgiveness isn't about absolving someone of their crimes or pretending that terrible things didn't happen. It's about refusing to let those crimes continue to poison your life, refusing to let the person who hurt you maintain power over your present and future. My mother forgave Walter not by visiting him or reconciling with him, but by choosing every day to build a life that honored his victims rather than his villainy. My father forgave him by refusing to become bitter, by choosing love over hate, by dedicating his freedom to helping others find theirs. And I forgave him by accepting that the grandfather who taught me to ride a bike and the monster who imprisoned my father were the same person. That human beings contain multitudes, that evil often wears a familiar face and we must be vigilant against it without becoming paralyzed by fear. Today, my father is 58 years old, healthy and happy, working as a counselor for the foundation my mother runs. He helps other survivors of long-term captivity navigate the complex process of rebuilding their lives, and his own story gives them hope that recovery is possible. My mother has found purpose in her work, has channeled her grief and guilt into something productive and healing. And me? I'm still a nurse, still working in the same ER where this story began, still saving lives one patient at a time. But now when I look at the people who come through those doors, the broken and bleeding and desperate, I see them differently. I see the stories they carry, the secrets they hold, the pain they've survived. And I treat each one of them as if they might be someone's father, returning after 18 years of absence, carrying a truth that could change everything. Last month, on the 5th anniversary of my father's return, we went back to that lake, the 3 of us together. We brought a small boat and pushed it out into the water with a candle inside, a memorial for all the people who didn't survive Walter's crimes, for all the families that weren't reunited, for all the stories that ended in tragedy instead of hope. As we watched the light drift across the water, my father put his arms around my mother and me, and he said something I'll never forget. Walter took 18 years from me, but he gave me something too. He gave me absolute clarity about what matters in life. Not money, not status, not power, but this. Standing here with the people you love, watching the sun set over the water, knowing that you survived and you're still capable of joy despite everything. That's victory. That's freedom. That's what he could never take away, no matter how long he kept me locked up. My mother squeezed his hand. I wasted 18 years not knowing you were alive, believing you had abandoned us. But I'm not going to waste one more day on regret. We have now, we have each other, and we have the rest of our lives to make new memories. I touched the lighthouse pendant around my neck, the same design as my father's tattoo, the symbol of the light that guided him home. I spent 18 years learning to hate, I said, but it took me only a moment to remember how to love. That's the real miracle. Not that Dad survived, but that we all did, that we found our way back to each other through all that darkness. As the candle on the water flickered and went out, we stood there together, a family that had been shattered and somehow put back together, not perfectly, never perfectly, but whole enough, strong enough, loving enough to face whatever came next. Walter Beaumont built an empire on suffering and died alone in a prison cell, unmourned and unremembered except as a cautionary tale. My father spent 18 years in captivity and emerged as a hero, a survivor, a testament to the unbreakable resilience of the human spirit. The question people always ask me is whether it was worth it, whether the pain and trauma and years of separation were worth the reunion we eventually got. And my answer is always the same. It's the wrong question. We don't get to choose what happens to us. We only get to choose how we respond, whether we let evil define us or whether we rise above it, whether we let hate consume us or whether we find our way back to love. My father could have emerged from his captivity as a broken, bitter man consumed by revenge. My mother could have let guilt destroy her. I could have let anger poison my life. But we all chose differently. We chose healing over hatred, hope over despair, love over everything else. And that choice, that daily decision to build something beautiful from the ruins of what Walter destroyed, that's what makes our story not just a tale of survival, but a genuine miracle. As I write this now, 6 years after that fateful night in the ER, I can hear my parents in the kitchen of the house we all share, laughing about something ridiculous, probably arguing about who makes better pancakes, living a normal, ordinary, beautiful life that once seemed impossible. That's the miracle. Not that we survived, but that we learned to live again. Not that justice was served, but that we didn't let injustice destroy us. Not that evil was defeated, but that love proved stronger. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Darkness is real and monsters exist, sometimes wearing the faces of people we love and trust. But light is real too, and it's stronger than any darkness, more persistent than any evil, more powerful than any hate. My father was my light for 18 years when I thought he was gone, and I was his light during 18 years of captivity, when he had nothing else to hold on to. That light brought us back to each other, brought my family back from the edge of destruction, brought hope back into lives that seemed hopeless. So yes, I believe in miracles. I've lived one. But the miracle isn't that my father survived Walter's basement or that justice eventually prevailed. The miracle is that after everything we went through, we still have the courage to love, the strength to trust, the faith to believe that tomorrow will be better than today. That's the miracle that saved us. That's the miracle that continues to save us every single day. And that's the miracle I hope you'll carry with you long after you've finished reading our story. The knowledge that no matter how dark things get, no matter how impossible the situation seems, love and courage and truth will always, always find a way to bring you home. 10 years have passed since that night in the emergency room when a dying stranger turned out to be my father, and sometimes it still feels like a dream, like something that happened to someone else in another lifetime. But then I look at the lighthouse pendant around my neck, or I see my father playing with his grandchildren in the backyard, or I watch my mother smile in a way she never smiled during those 18 lost years. And I know it was all real. The nightmare and the miracle both. The Daniel Carter Foundation has grown beyond anything we imagined. What started as a small operation, helping Walter's victims, has expanded into a national organization with offices in 12 states. We've helped reunite 247 families torn apart by crime and captivity, and we've trained over 3,000 law enforcement officers to recognize the signs of long-term imprisonment that my father's case brought to light. Just last month, a detective in Oregon used our training materials to identify and rescue a woman who'd been held captive for 9 years. hidden in plain sight in a suburban neighborhood, while everyone assumed she had simply run away from home. My father, now 60 years old, has become something of a legend in the survivor community. He speaks at conferences, writes a blog about healing from trauma, and spends his days counseling people who are walking the same difficult path he once walked. The nightmares still come sometimes, and there are days when the weight of what he endured seems too heavy to carry, but he carries it anyway with a grace and dignity that leaves me in awe. He told me once that every person he helps heal, every family he helps reunite, feels like another piece of his own soul being restored. My mother transformed her guilt into purpose, with a ferocity that surprised everyone who knew her as the quiet, reserved woman who had spent 18 years in mourning. She serves as the executive director of the foundation, working 60-hour weeks, speaking to Congress about reforming missing person investigations, pushing for legislation to protect victims of family-perpetrated crimes. Last year, she was invited to the White House to receive an award for her advocacy work, and she brought my father as her date. The photo of them standing together in front of the president, my father's arm around my mother's waist, both of them smiling with genuine joy, sits framed on my desk at the hospital. As for me, I'm still a nurse, still working in emergency medicine, though I've added teaching to my responsibilities. I train new nurses not just in the technical aspects of emergency care, but in the art of truly seeing patients, of recognizing that every person who comes through those doors has a story, has people who love them, has a life that matters. I tell them about the night I almost missed recognizing my own father because I was so focused on treating a body that I nearly forgot to look for the person inside it. Some of my students cry when I tell them this story, and I let them, because tears mean they understand. Tears mean they're learning to lead with their hearts as well as their minds. Marcus Shaw, the journalist whose investigation helped bring Walter down, won his Pulitzer and used the prize money to start an independent investigative news outlet focused on exposing corruption and giving voice to victims of powerful predators. He and I have coffee once a month, and he always asks if we have any new leads for him to follow. Any other Walter Beaumonts hiding behind masks of respectability. Sometimes we do, and watching Marcus take down another monster with nothing but truth and persistence never gets old. The property where Walter's mansion once stood is now a memorial garden, established by unanimous vote of the city council after the building was demolished. 23 trees were planted there, one for each person who was held captive in Walter's basement, and in the center stands a sculpture of a lighthouse with the inscription, "In memory of those who were lost, in honor of those who survived, in hope that the light will always overcome the darkness." My father planted the first tree himself, a strong oak that's now grown tall enough to provide shade for the benches where people sit and remember. Walter's business empire was completely dismantled, his assets seized and distributed among his victims as restitution. Some of the companies that bore his name were sold off. Others were dissolved entirely. And every building, every foundation, every scholarship that carried the Beaumont name was renamed or restructured to ensure his legacy would be one of justice for his victims, not monuments to his false philanthropy. It was important to all of us that he be remembered not for what he pretended to be, but for what he truly was. A cautionary tale about the evil that can hide behind a respectable facade. But here's something I didn't expect. Some of the people who had been helped by Walter's charitable work over the years have chosen to stay connected to the foundation, volunteering their time and donating money to ensure that the good work continues under a new name and a new purpose. They understand that they can acknowledge the help they received while also condemning the man who provided it, that these two truths can exist simultaneously without contradiction. It's a complicated moral space to occupy, but life is complicated, and simple answers to complex questions are usually wrong. My parents renewed their wedding vows again last year on their 30th anniversary, 30 years of marriage, but only 12 of those years actually spent together. The ceremony was held at that lake where my father used to take me fishing, where we floated the memorial candle 5 years ago, where so many of our most important moments have unfolded. My father wrote his own vows, and I don't think there was a dry eye in the crowd when he spoke about how love had sustained him through 18 years of darkness, how the memory of my mother's face had been the thing he held on to when he had nothing else, how coming home to her had been worth every moment of suffering, because it meant they could grow old together. I got married too, 3 years ago, to a wonderful man named David, who works as a social worker for the foundation. We met when he was helping to counsel one of Walter's victims, and I was immediately drawn to his kindness, his patience, his deep understanding that healing is not a destination but a journey. My father walked me down the aisle, and when he placed my hand in David's, he whispered, "Take care of my light," and David promised he would, and he has. We have twin daughters now, 2-year-olds named Hope and Grace, and my father is the kind of grandfather I always knew he would be. Present, loving, engaged, the polar opposite of the man who stole him from us. Hope and Grace will grow up knowing their grandfather's story, knowing what he survived, knowing that their family was broken and then healed, that evil touched us but didn't destroy us. They'll learn that monsters are real, but so are heroes, that darkness exists, but light is stronger, that love is not just a feeling, but a choice we make every day to fight for the people who matter most. These are hard lessons for children, but they're true lessons, and we believe that truth, even difficult truth, is always better than comfortable lies. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and everyone else is asleep, I go out onto the porch and look up at the stars, and I think about all the lives that intersected on that rainy night 10 years ago. If my father had been brought to a different hospital, if I hadn't been working that shift, if I hadn't seen his tattoo, if he hadn't whispered that warning about Walter, if any one of 1,000 small details had been different, none of this would have happened. Our family would still be broken, Walter would still be free, his other victims would still be suffering in silence, and the foundation that has helped hundreds of people would never have existed. Was it fate? Divine intervention? Random chance? I don't know, and I've stopped trying to figure it out. What I know is that we were given a second chance, a miracle, in the form of a dying man, showing up in the right place at the right time, and we didn't waste it. We took our pain and transformed it into purpose, took our suffering and used it to ease the suffering of others, took our broken family and rebuilt it into something stronger than it was before. My father says that Walter's greatest mistake was underestimating love, thinking that 18 years of separation would be enough to make us forget each other, to make the bonds of family dissolve into nothing. But love doesn't work that way. Real love doesn't fade with time or distance or even death. It persists. It endures. It finds a way. My father loved me for 18 years from inside a prison cell, and I loved him for 18 years while hating him, and somehow that love survived everything Walter threw at it and brought us back together. That's the real ending to this story, the truth that transcends all the darkness and pain and trauma. Love wins. Not quickly, not easily, not without scars and sacrifices, but eventually, inevitably, love wins. It won for us. And it can win for you, too. Whatever darkness you're facing, whatever monsters are hiding in your life, whatever seems impossible right now. Years ago, I went to work thinking it would be just another shift, just another night of saving strangers and going home tired. Instead, I got my father back, exposed a monster, helped save dozens of other victims, and learned that miracles are real. Not the fairy tale kind where everything is instantly fixed and no one has to do any hard work, but the real kind, the messy, complicated, difficult miracles that require courage and persistence and faith and love. My father survived 18 years of captivity and came back to us. My mother survived 18 years of grief and guilt and found her purpose. I survived 18 years of misplaced hatred and learned to love again. Our family survived Walter Beaumont's evil and became stronger because of it, not in spite of it. That's our miracle. That's our triumph. That's the light that the lighthouse represents, the light that never goes out no matter how dark the storm, the light that always, always guides us home. And as I sit here on this porch, watching the stars and listening to my daughters sleep and knowing that my parents are growing old together the way they always should have, I understand something profound. Walter Beaumont lost. Not just because he's dead, or because he died in prison, or because his empire was destroyed. He lost because we're still here, still loving each other, still building beautiful things from the ruins he created, still choosing hope over despair every single day. That's the best revenge, the sweetest victory, the most perfect ending. We're still here, and we're happy, and we're free. And no matter what darkness came before, no matter what evil tried to destroy us, that light, the light of love, of family, of unbreakable human spirit, that light will never, ever go out.